So our first question is, can you describe your career trajectories for the members of the audience who might be new to your work? Uh, So Frank, could you start us off, and then we'll go through all three, and then I will give you the floor for your presentations.
Okay. Um, I guess I started out as an elementary school teacher, very interested in children's literature during my certification program. And the first 6 books I wrote and the work I was doing was on reading pedagogy in general. At the time, it was multimodal because it was picture books that I was working with predominantly, but my work was on reading workshop and reading pedagogy, and it stayed that way for quite a while. Eventually, the work I was doing on research on picture books morphed into semiotics and multimodality, which is where it is now. So when you had asked in that note, what would I describe my trajectory now as? It's kind of I'm working across 4 different areas, and so the pedagogy stuff is still there, but it's kind of morphed into what I wrote in a piece, critical multimodal literacy pedagogy. And so it's blending critical theory, multimodality, and multiliteracies approaches. That's still a part of it. I just edited a book called Beyond Language, Reimagining Literacies for Inclusive Futures. And so a lot of that critical work around what does it mean to be literate. There was a lot of work from refugee populations and work with some of my friends in Spain are part of that book. I wrote a piece called Metamodal Awareness, which is part of this pedagogy thing, trying to understand how we help students become more aware of the multimodal nature of communication. So that's one strand. Another strand is I just edited a section on digital literacies research. So the section was about different approaches to researching digital literacy, and that was the section that I was in charge of. And then I'm still doing a lot of work on multimodal analysis itself. I just authored a chapter for the Handbook of Qualitative Content Analysis on multimodal content analysis that I'd started years ago with Stephanie Reed when she was a doc student here. And then the last one is, I guess it's because I'm old and have been around long enough, but I've been asked recently to write a lot of handbook chapters. So mostly around picture books and multimodality in picture books. So I have a piece coming out in the Cambridge History of Children's Literature and handbook on multimodality and linguistics. And so a lot of the stuff on word and image. And so there's been a lot of that writing. So it still kind of keeps me in the picture book children's literature world, but also in that sort of multimodality and semiotic field as well. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, great. So Erica, can you describe your career trajectory for those of us that have not had the chance to become familiar with your work?
Sure, absolutely. So I started as an elementary teacher. I specialized in English as a second language. I live and work in Globe, Arizona. That's where I taught most of my time. I also spent some time in the Levine Elementary District. But during Red for Ed, kind of that season of education is when I really started to notice how imperative it was to have highly qualified and certified teachers in rural areas, because it was directly impacting my students, my community. And so I partnered with our local community college. Eastern Arizona College was what it was called at the time, to sort of revive their education programs that they used to have, and then they went away. And so through that revival, becoming adjunct faculty there, I made connections with the Teachers College here and transferred over into the undergraduate programs, working still rural. So I was the rural connection between Mary Lou Fulton and various community colleges throughout the state to set up transfer tracks for students in rural communities to transfer into undergraduate programs to get their degrees and certification. This is my 7th year with the Teachers College. I'm a clinical associate professor now and an area lead for the special education programs. And I continue to just, in my time here, find opportunities to build those connections and our reach in rural areas all across the state. And I'll talk more about that when it's my time to share. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Okay, Molly.
All right. So for sure. And I will say that in terms of my career trajectory, my journey to working in Ethiopia or even in higher ed was definitely not planned or straightforward. So now I can make sense of it looking back, right? But I think that's the case for maybe a lot of us. But so, and how I'm making sense of it is that, you know, my career and the career choices I've made have really always been pretty strongly aligned with my personal values. I was raised by some very religious Roman Catholics and educated in a lot of Catholic schools. Actually, Michigan, the University of Michigan, where I did my PhD, was the first non-Catholic school I attended. But I'm not personally religious, but a lot of kind of the Catholic social justice tradition I've figured out has informed my personal values and then also my career choices. So in my 20s, I left a pretty good business technology consulting career because it just wasn't, again, lining up with sort of where I saw, you know, my values being and what I wanted to do with my life. And so I saw, you know, naively, maybe in some ways, I saw higher education, you know, sort of our possibilities as a sort of sector in terms of the public good aspects of working in higher ed. So I shifted, I worked in student affairs for a while, and then eventually, as I said, I got my PhD at Michigan in higher ed, and then I took a faculty job first at the University of Miami in Florida, and then I came to ASU, I think in 2011. So most of my research early career focuses still in some ways on administrative and organizational issues in American colleges and universities. But over time, I became, you know, kind of a little bit cynical about the US post-secondary system. And at the same time, I was the only higher education faculty member at Arizona State for a lot of years. And Sherman knows this directly, how I started getting involved in international work, as does Sam, because basically as the only person who was a higher ed expert, there would be certain international opportunities, international grants that would come. I was pre-tenure. I was, Sherman's giving thumbs up because he was such a good mentor to me during that time in terms of helping me to understand what I was probably feasible to do pre-tenure, as I was also the master's program coordinator of the higher ed program, in addition to being the only faculty member pre-tenure. So yada, yada, I got tenure, thanks God, even though I'm not super religious anymore. So then it kind of came a pivotal moment, just randomly, a couple of years after I was tenured, ASU's International Development Office came to me again, and there was a $60 million USAID funded opportunity in Ethiopia that included a component that was called higher education capacity building. Sam, people who do, and Teresa knows this too, capacity building used to be a big thing for USAID when it existed. So I was like, okay, cool. You know, it seemed cool and interesting in terms of the focus, content focus. And then also I had a chance, timely enough, it was in Ethiopia. I had never been to Ethiopia, you know, knew pretty much nothing about Ethiopia, but I have two colleagues who had connections with Ethiopia and who I love, both of them. One is a professor and still is of higher ed at Addis Ababa University. And then at the time, our colleague Meseret Hailu was an assistant professor here at ASU, and she's Ethiopian American. And so we had never, the three of us, actually collaborated. So we were like, okay, this seems cool, you know, whatever, we'll just go after it. And then from a professional standpoint, that particular project, as I mentioned, and this kind of leads into then what I'll talk about in terms of the next questions Jeannie asked me. That project, a key role was to organize a national alliance of public universities and technical colleges around actually student career readiness, and then also to develop employment-related programs for both faculty as well as students. And so it aligned with my sort of, you know, content expertise to some extent. And then it was also just, you know, a really exciting opportunity for me to collaborate with those colleagues. So that's, I guess, kind of how I got into the international work that I'm doing. And since then, certainly Ethiopia has been sort of is at the center of really a lot of my global work. Although right now I'm also starting to engage. I'm a co-PI on an award that involves similar sort of organizational administrative issues, institution level stuff that is involving a partnership between 15 universities in Ukraine, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and what's the other one? Estonia. So I've got a lot going on now. Once you get into international work, I'm sure Sam and Maria Teresa can validate. It's hard to get out of it. So that's it.
Okay, great. All right, so now, Frank, I posed 2 questions to you to frame your discussion, and then I'm gonna tell the audience both of them and then let you go at it. So for a few minutes. So the first one, and of course, if you want to change the questions, that is also fine. So how do you approach studying multimodal texts, and why is it important to pay attention to multimodality? And then I was just curious to hear you talk more about how, if at all, your artwork informs your practice as a scholar, because I know you have multiple, multiple interests in the arts between photography, your music, and wine. So I just was curious, being a sommelier and all that, so how that might inform your practice as a scholar.
I'll start with number 2 first. Then we'll go back to number 1. I'm not sure how my sommelier training aligns with picture books and multimodality, but they're both important things, I can say that. The photography part really aligned well because I have published 7 children's picture books with my own writing and photography. So it was very interesting. I was one of the only scholars at a research university, I think still am, who've done both sides of it, who've studied picture books and illustrated and created picture books. So I learned a lot about myself as an artist by studying what I was creating, and I learned a lot about myself as a researcher by being part of the production process, the creative process of creating those. It's an interesting kind of connection. And so I learned, for example, as an artist that picture book authors don't write them to teach kids how to read, right? And yet that's the main way teachers use them in classrooms, right? I mean, I never asked myself, how will this help kids predict when I was writing a picture book? But yet that's how those books were used. And so it's interesting. I wrote the books to share information, to get children involved in the environment and conservation issues, appreciation of nature. And yet they were constantly, teachers saying, I love your books. They help me teach predicting. And I, kind of like, yeah, that's why I wrote them. No, had nothing to do with it, right? And so that was always interesting to see it from those sides. So that's kind of an answer to number 2. I am studying how music is represented in picture books right now, so I guess there's a connection to my own music background. But since I can't read music, and it's been interesting to kind of study how music is represented because I can't read notes. That doesn't make sense. I just watch people play and learn, right? So that's kind of interesting too. The first part, this whole concept of multimodality, whenever I talk about it, I always begin with this guy, Harmut Stockel from Germany, who wrote that multimodality is the late discovery of the obvious, right? I just think it's a great way of thinking about it because this stuff has been around for thousands of years. We've had multimodal communication, hieroglyphics, the Book of Kells, early Bibles. The Gutenberg Bible is a multimodal text. It's got image, it's got design, it's got text in it. It's only been recently that people have brought social semiotic theory to bear on the differences between what an image does and what a word does. And so when I'm talking with friends or people not academics and they ask me what I'm studying, that's kind of what I talk about. How are words and images different? And it's really quite interesting. For example, recently in a paper I wrote, I rejected the concept that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Because I don't care how many words I give you, it will never do what a picture does, right? And so trying to explain that comment to people has been quite interesting. I also would suggest that my work has been trying to, where originally when I was involved in pedagogy and reading comprehension work, trying to help children learn how to make sense of picture books, what they mean. I'm more interested now in how they work. So my questions are more about how do picture books mean, not what do they mean, which is kind of an interesting shift. And so I've tried for quite a few years, 20 years probably, to understand semiotics, which is an incredibly complex theoretical paradigm. Charles Sanders Peirce, his work is incredibly obtuse at times, but definitely pictures work different than words, and they do different things, and they make different epistemological commitments. And so when we combine them together, we can get very different relationships between the picture and the word. If you look at any of some of Rene Magritte's paintings, where he has the famous picture of the pipe, and it says, "This is not a pipe." I don't know if you, "Ce n'est pas une pipe" in French. It's because he's trying to suggest that this is a representation of a pipe. And how the word pipe and how a photo of a pipe work are very, very different. One is based on symbolic relationship. We just selected out of convention the four letters PIPE to represent pipe. It could be any other four letters, but time has taken its toll and this has become conventionalized. But a photo of a pipe is very different. It has to have some relationship with an actual pipe. It's hard to take a picture of a pipe without having a pipe there as far as photography goes. But now in our time of AI, you can generate all the images you want of pipes and anything else, right? Whether they exist or not. So the connection between representation and object has gotten very diverse, right? We have representations of things that don't exist all the time. And so that's been really interesting in trying to understand the relationship between words and images, especially in terms of picture books and the kind of text that children are associated with. Of course, now with the internet and digital technologies, we have to add not just word and image, we have to add moving image and animation and gaming modules. And there's so many different modalities now that it gets incredibly complex and trying to understand what they do, right? What does a picture book application do that's different than a picture book has always been a fascinating question for me, and not reducible to which one works better for teaching kids to read. It's just not that simple. And so basically that's the theoretical grounding of a lot of this work, is trying to understand how things come to mean. One of the pieces I just finished was called "The Instantiation of Narrative in Picture Book Form." So rather than start with the picture book, I start with the concept of narrative and then talk about how does narrative become or be instantiated in the form of a picture book. And so that's quite interesting. Most people don't know that the illustrations, unless they're the same person, are often drawn long after the words have been submitted, unless they're the same person. And so how do they do so well with that, right? And is it different than like Sendak when he did Where the Wild Things Are? Because he did both. He was able to control what he put into image versus what he put into text. And is that different? And how is that different? So I don't want to ramble on too long, but that's kind of really some of the stuff it sounds pretty basic, but it gets pretty complex when you start really diving into the difference between, an icon, an index, and a symbol in semiotic terms. If you have another question, I'll wander in a different direction, but I don't
No,
know.
I think that
Yeah,
that'll get us started. So
great.
we'll save the other questions for the question and answer.
Sounds good.
So Erica, would you like to tell us about, the questions I gave Erica was, can you describe some of the challenges of rural learners and how you work to address them? And then also, I thought it would be helpful for us if you told us a bit about the engagement efforts in the MLFC that you're involved with, because there's a lot going on in this college, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of, and we don't always know of all of the things that our colleagues are doing. So those are my questions. So I will mute and let you have the.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I am from the very small mining town of Globe, Arizona. Most people had never heard of it until very recently when we were all over the news these last few weeks because of the massive flooding that we've had from the storms. So if you've seen that, it's very real. The footage that you've seen it's real. It has been a crazy few weeks, but my family's okay, and our community is really strong. That's one really great thing about rural community. In relation to the challenges of rural learners, I grew up as a rural student living here. So I know from a K-12 aspect, I know coming back as a K-12 teacher what it was like. And then now working in higher education, I kind of have a 3D lens of all those things. So I'll start by talking just about K-12 students first and some of the barriers that they experience. The obvious is the socioeconomic barrier. So we have higher rates of poverty, limited access to healthcare, social services, mental health, and other like academic support. So that's a huge thing that we always consider. We have a massive teacher shortage. There's a teacher shortage throughout the state, and it is even more prevalent in rural communities because oftentimes rural schools can't offer the same salaries to highly qualified and certified educators. And we're also, because of our location, like not the most desirable place for people to move to work if they're not from here. I grew up here. I love it. I think it's beautiful. But someone not from this place might come here and say, no, this isn't for me. So there's a huge turnover. Or there's a lot of educators that are in classrooms in rural communities that are not highly certified and qualified in education, and that poses its own problem as well. For K-12 learners, there is very limited access to more advanced coursework. So in high school, the only AP classes that were available to me when I was in high school was English 101 and 102. That was the only option that I had to prepare myself for that transition to higher education. And unfortunately, that was a long time ago, and it hasn't changed much for our high school students in our community. There are more options, but not what would be equivalent to what is available to students in rural or urban communities. There is also a lack of academic support for high school students that are thinking about preparing for higher education. So, academic counselors at the high school, while we do have them, it's just not as robust. And also in rural communities, it's a very high level of first generation higher education students. And so they don't have the family support or navigation to guide them in that direction of higher education oftentimes. There is technology and connectivity issues where, I now, as my role as a clinical associate professor, going in and observing student teachers in the Valley in, these urban schools and seeing all the technology that's available to students in K-12 classrooms. And I'm thinking like, you don't see that as much in rural settings. They just don't have the same access. And then thinking more through the higher education lens, there is geographic isolation and travel barriers. So for me, living in Globe, to get to Tempe campus, it's a minimum without traffic, an hour and 40 minutes for me to get there. And so for students who are trying to get to a university in these rural communities, thinking about a commute, like some of it, it's just not realistic. And so they need, and relocating is probably not a feasible option either because of expense. So there's those financial constraints as well. And another aspect that's shared across K-12 and higher education is just that oftentimes curriculum doesn't address or align with the reality of rural students. So history, lived experience, it's not connected to their personal lives. And so that can lead to some disengagement in learning overall. So those are just some of the barriers that I think of constantly as I continue my work, and what has really led me to continue to pursue the outreach through the college now. So in relation to that, some of the efforts that I'm involved in through MLFC, I'll start when I first started with ASU. I was part of a program. There were 2 faculty hired, myself and one other faculty member. She lives in Yuma, and we were basically the rural faculty. And we partnered with community colleges, so one in Yuma and one in this region of Globe, Miami, and the Gila Valley area. And we took in transfer students from these community colleges into an elementary and special education dual certification program. This was very boots on the ground work. We recruited our students by just reaching out to rural districts. And so I was Googling principal contact information for rural districts all over the state and said, do you have paraprofessionals, parents that might be interested in becoming teachers and they need an accessible way to do it? I have an option for you. And connecting with those rural districts. And I think being able to say, like, I am a rural educator, I understand the need, was really helpful in having those conversations. So we started using Sync, or at the time it was just Zoom. So I would teach from the community college campus as a satellite, but I would Zoom in students from a few other areas. So we had some students on American Indian reservations throughout the state, and then a few outliers that couldn't come to the community college campus, and we used Zoom to meet. Our classes were offered in the evenings to make it more accessible for the working person. And our enrollment really grew rather quickly, and we got the green light to reach out beyond just our community college campuses. And before we knew it, we had outliers all across rural Arizona. And then COVID happened and Zoom became the norm, and all classes were available using Sync, which was amazing because the reach just grew exponentially at that time. But we always like to say that we were the pioneers of Sync before it really happened. So in the last 5 years, because the students came in as juniors, so I've been here 7 years, but we'll say 5 years from the completion of the first group. 17 students in my community of Globe, Miami have completed their degree and certification and are now highly qualified, either elementary or special education teachers, just in Globe, Miami alone. I think that's so amazing. So I now work in ASU Teaching Fellows. ASU Teaching Fellows is an accelerated undergraduate program that leads to certification and a degree while the individuals are working in Arizona classrooms. And so in order for students to be admitted to the Teaching Fellows program, they have to have an AA or an equivalent of 60 credits, and they have to be working in an Arizona school. The reason that I chose to move into this program next is because it directly aligned with the work I was doing and it's basically what we had when I started, but on a much broader scope. And the students are able to use their work experience as their student teaching experience. So if they're paraprofessionals, instructional aides, or they're on emergency sub-certificates, they're using job-embedded experiences through their coursework that counts for their student teaching. So they're done with their program in 3 semesters instead of 4, because that 4th student teaching semester has been embedded throughout the other 3. They receive discounted tuition as well, which is a huge benefit for our rural students. This is a cohort model, so the students stay together as they move throughout their program, and the faculty rotate, so they have a different faculty member all 3 semesters, but they stay together with their same group of learners. I'm also a member of the transfer student project team, and our goal is to really offer the supports needed for transfer students. They're, I think, a group that gets overlooked sometimes with the barriers that they face, and we want to make sure that they stay and they finish their programs because it can be really hard for them. And so we have done a few different things, but our primary focus aligned to one of the design aspirations, enabling student success, is addressing the key challenges that they face, which include tools, resources, and just support, additional support that they need. So this fall, we held 2 transfer student orientation meetings before the fall semester started on Zoom. We sent out an email blast to all admitted transfer students, and we said, hey, hop on this Zoom call so that we can give you some tips and tricks to be prepared before the semester starts to help you be successful. And then we have a midterm Zoom session scheduled for this coming Monday. And we're inviting all students, not just transfer students, but just focusing on kind of like that midterm slump and how to get through and finish strong throughout the remainder of the semester. We give them some tools and resources. These meetings are hosted by faculty, so they can have that face-to-face engagement with faculty members on Zoom and be able to ask questions and receive answers. So that is a project team that is in the works right now. And we are also, one of our goals is to figure out how we can also offer some recognition to our transfer students as they get closer to graduation and upon graduation, acknowledging their hard work and dedication, because for a lot of them, they are first generation. They've had to come over some major obstacles to make it, and we want to make sure that we're able to highlight and celebrate that for them. The most recent project that I have been a part of starting this fall is PEAIC. So PEAIC stands for Preparing Educators for Arizona's Indian Communities. This is a pilot program that's sponsored by 2 different grants, and it's led by Lirio Patent. And the focus is on supporting Indigenous serving educators after they've graduated. So PEAIC students, it's a program primarily for Indigenous students that are seeking a degree and certification. The work that I'm doing right now is the students who have graduated. We are offering a support cycle post-graduation to make sure that they can be successful in the classroom in that first year of teaching after they finish their program. So my students that I've been working with are on the San Carlos Apache Reservation and the White River Apache Reservation. So being able to go and visit them at their sites, in their classrooms. We use the guided growth cycle using the CRACE and their site-based criteria evaluation tools. They have a mentor teacher that is assigned to them at their site, and we use that growth cycle to provide feedback, set up next steps and resources, and just offer them support to make sure that they feel supported in their first year after they have finished their program. These are all really amazing programs and opportunities to engage with rural students. And I think I'm directly seeing the impact in my community on how the Teachers College is really branching out and providing more accessible means to higher education for rural students. And it's trickling down directly to K-12 learners as well. They're reaping the benefits of what we are providing.
Okay, great. All right, so Molly, you're on now. And so I asked you to tell us a bit about the partnership with Walla University and how it developed, and also the challenges and benefits of international partnerships. So
yeah, and I would say I'm going to start a little bit, frame this with challenges, not just partnerships, but of doing international academic work in the global South, which I am, several of my colleagues on this have much more experience with these challenges than I do. But one thing I want to point out is that starting with the academic reward system, which values its values, our values, align with, global North conceptions of quality, rigor, validity, et cetera, established by sort of the German universities at the turn of the century in the 1900s, and then American universities and sort of European universities have continued sort of defining what high quality academic work is, right? And that's defined by the global north. And then also too, in social science and in education specifically, our reward system values research that a scholar produces individually, and then, or at least being, right, the first author on, most of our manuscripts. And then finally, another sort of challenge that I've personally encountered sort of framing this was USAID, when they existed, those projects were phrased or framed as implementation awards. And I know Sherman and Sam especially have sort of an understanding of this, but actually I at one point met with USAID's higher education lead. She was based in DC, and she told me directly that USAID's higher education arm doesn't fund research. That's not the point of their work. They do implementation. So those were sort of, challenges that existed when I was entering as an individual academic into this global South space of doing this work. And so if that had been, if I had aligned myself with those motivations, there never would have been a partnership with Wall University, and I would not be going back to Ethiopia now because the USAID project would have ended, pew, 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 and that would have been done. But so I really intentionally decided that, I was the PI for the USAID project, but I structured the award so the majority of the resources went directly to Ethiopia and Ethiopians. And then I also built a team at ASU that consisted primarily of diaspora members, mostly graduate students who were Ethiopian, which we needed from a technical standpoint due to their language fluency and understanding of the culture. But then also it's reflected, I think, to our team, our commitment from the ASU side that, we really wanted this project to be to the benefit of Ethiopia. And even though I myself, of course, am an Anglo, the project and the team was really there for and directed to benefit Ethiopians as much as possible. And then we also as a team started out from the beginning, we had faculty, again, even though USAID didn't want research, we did, particularly, the grad students and the pre-tenure faculty on our team. So we really, from the start, I as the PI defined with the team how research credit and authorship would work, and that it would always be rotating. I was not going to be the lead author or sole author at all on any of our publications or outputs. And we would always have grad students too. They would get credit as well as co-authors. So that, I think, established from the start sort of the, ethos and the sense of trust between myself and my Ethiopian counterparts. And so I also told them that, I didn't want to just parachute in, implement this project, and then bail out and find another thing, that I really wanted to, establish kind of ongoing collaborations there. So that's what led to this partnership that Jeannie mentioned with a specific university in Ethiopia that it still exists today. And actually, Francesca, who's on this call, is part of that partnership and engaging in collaborations with our colleagues there. So as I mentioned, we had an alliance, or a part of our USAID project was to build this alliance of colleges and universities across the country. So each school had a focal person, and it was their career center director. And we engaged with them a lot because our project was about, career and youth employment. So the focal person for Wall University was an engineering faculty member who was also their career center. His name is Wubishet. And during that time, during the time when we first won the award, a civil war erupted in Ethiopia, and it was occurring in the region where Wallo is located. And in fact, their campus was the site of a pretty major battle between the government and the other side. But anyway, so I was super impressed by Wubishet without even knowing about his sort of what he was experiencing. And then when I found out, I was like, I mean, you're in the middle of a war zone and you're still just like incredible. And so when I was just impressed by him generally, and then he, when we were meeting in Addis, invited me to meet with the president of his university. His name is Dr. Mengesha, who established interest in developing more collaborations with ASU. And so he's super impressive too. And actually, he's moved on to a larger sort of prestigious university presidency in Ethiopia, and he's kind of on track to be high level in the ministry now. But at the time, he expressed interest. I was like, okay, I mean, I'm just a regular faculty member, but I'll see what I can do in terms of my connections. I'll do my best. So I first reached out to Dean Basile and sort of our college and administration, but there didn't seem to be too much alignment at the college level. So again, this was different, 4 years ago, 5 years, no, 6 years ago, I guess. But so I approached ASU International Development. So again, at the time, they were funding us, our project, or they had helped us get the USAID award. And I kind of pitched that if we engage Wallow and Ethiopian universities further as a strategy to tap into, at the time, opportunities that were on the USAID forecast, in response to the devastation that was going on in the country at the time. So the ASU International Development Office recognized that, and they helped me to establish this formal relationship. Again, I can answer questions about what happened with USAID, but I'm not going to talk more about that right now. And then coming back to kind of the challenges. So again, this partnership, this work we're doing with Wallow continues on, but the reality is, there are, and I'll be like pretty explicit about this, there are people at ASU who don't actually really, are in the senior sort of management, university administration level. This work isn't really aligned with ASU's kind of current approach to global work. So institutional institutional partnerships right now, really, the university prioritizes the Sintana schools, and that makes sense because, as I'm sure most of you know, ASU has an ownership stake in Sintana, and those are, it was laureate, like for-profit universities, and so now we own those partially. And so Wallow, the work that I do in Wallow in Ethiopia, doesn't have, sort of the type of financial payoff or sort of financial stake that would immediately kind of produce the types of revenues that certainly partnerships with for-profit universities would do. And Ethiopia is not going to be the setting for any super big opportunities for that type of model in terms of the economic reality of that. So that has been a challenge. Sort of the work that we're doing, recognizing that, and also recognizing, again, the funding landscape, the political landscape, everything that's going on right now in terms of U.S. foreign policy certainly is creating a lot of challenges. But, for me, back to like kind of the benefits of these institutional partnerships, I really hope, and Francesca is on here, so she has to be nice to me, but I really hope and think that there have been benefits in terms of the collaborations we've been doing. We've co-published a lot of manuscripts, not just in education, also colleagues from Herberger, colleagues from engineering. I will say one of the just breaks my heart. We were able, actually, Wubashed, who I mentioned, was the original guy who sort of connected with me. He only had a master's degree in engineering in it. We ended up getting him an opportunity. He was studying it for his PhD here at ASU at the Poly campus. Unfortunately, he was funded by USAID, and his funding was pulled. He just completed his first year in the systems engineering PhD program, but because the funding was canceled, he had to return to Ethiopia. And he's there. He has 1 year. Hopefully, his visa will expire because also the Trump administration has decided to take Ethiopia. Well, whatever. I'm going into details, but so there's a lot of personal challenges, right, in terms of, and then also, the larger geopolitics of doing work internationally right now is really, really, really difficult. But honestly, benefits, again, as I said, I think, we've produced a lot of great academic outputs. We've been applying for a ton of grants, again, interdisciplinarily. People in engineering are doing work on this, Herberger, the business school, I'll probably forget other academic units where individual faculty, health, the College of Health Solutions, there's been a lot of work, people going there, collaborating with colleagues in Ethiopia. So that kind of, benefit certainly to ASU, I hope is something the university recognizes as a value for this work. And then also, for me personally, there's no price you can put on what I've been able to experience in terms of the friendships, the relationships, I go to Ethiopia now a couple of times a year. And it's just been, remarkable for me. But I will say though, these tensions, I'm actually working right now with a colleague at Wallow University on a manuscript called Critical Praxis and Ethics in Global North-South Academic Collaborations, because there's a lot of, there's a lot of complexity in doing this work and still trying to stay true to your own personal values. So, but I will say, to conclude. It's definitely been the most rewarding thing I've had the chance to do in my career. And so I'm thankful to everybody at ASU who's supported this work and has joined it too. So that's all.
Okay, great. So now we want to open it up to questions. So do folks have questions for our panelists?
I have a question for Frank. I had no idea about your artistic, abilities, especially in music and all that. It was just really awesome to hear about that and how you have utilized these verbal, visual, and musical elements into your work. And and I can see some connection with the work that I do with kids with emotional and behavioral health, how these kind of modalities can create an immersive experience for them, and also some calming kind of approaches for those who have received some trauma in their earlier experiences.
Yeah, no, I agree. All the stuff that matters to a lot of kids keeps getting yanked out of school, right? The arts and music and recess, everything that kept me in school, it keeps getting pushed to the side.
Yeah.
And there's a long history and trajectory of music therapy, bibliotherapy around the arts and well-being and stuff. And, I can only say for myself that I escape into my music room daily here at the house. My camera, I'm looking forward to a couple upcoming trips to get back, and I call it just spending time in the dirt. It's just fulfilling. It fills my soul. And I come back from 3 days of just taking pictures of rocks and things. And people are like, what did you do? I sat by a waterfall for 4 hours and took 80 pictures. And they're kind of like, wow, I took one. And it's very different. No one likes to go with me unless they're a fellow photographer. Lindsay called it boot camp, because you got to get up at 3 a.m. to see the sun come up. But for me, it's just time spent that really helps me come back here and see possibilities again.
So I do have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
That's a personal journey that you took. It was the passion that you had.
Yeah.
How all this, stuff that you did, sort of, how was it like to be seeking tenure and promotion with the work that you were doing, especially with picture books and all that?
When I was working with faculty at the time, I came in here with tenure, but when I went up for tenure at UNLV the first time around, I asked should I even include my picture books on there? And I remember Dave Moore, when we were CTEL, talked about that. He's like, you're the only person doing this stuff. Why wouldn't you? And it's always interesting when I send out my CV, someone's like, you got picture books listed pretty high on your CV. And it's like, yeah, I'm as proud of those as any other book I've written, right? And it's interesting that, and I think, we've been talking a lot about what are criteria for promotion? What does it mean to have impact? And these are great questions. And I think, Audrey and I have talked about this since we were in CTEL together. I think really a tribute to some of the early work that's continuing is the fact that we made those things open and supportive of people doing different kinds of work to be considered impactful. I think we've got more challenges ahead of how do we make knowledge entrepreneurship, or whatever we're calling it, innovation and stuff, as part of this too. And I know that there's a lot of challenges of demonstrating impact, especially immediately, right? You think of an article that has had impact, it's usually 20 years after the article was written is when you really realize the impact. And so I think those are really good questions. I think, as far as what we do here, impact and knowledge generation, helping students and teachers be better at what they do. I don't know what else we're supposed to be doing that matters,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a follow-up question to that, Frank. And
Yeah.
so, we're talking scholarship, teaching, and service, right? So to underscore your
Right.
service
Yeah.
and underscore a comment that Jeannie made prior, how does your life as a sommelier inform your work as the governance committee chair?
It doesn't really inform it, but it makes it tolerable, my friend. You never should have convinced me to run. Yes. It's more of a placebo effect after the meetings, for sure. Thanks. Great question.
Uh-huh.
Always one in the audience.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts, reflections about the panel?
Erica, I had no idea of all the stuff you're doing. I'm so nice to have met you the other meeting when we were on the table together, if I remember correctly. But I think, growing up myself in sort of a rural area in upstate New York, that it's not the same thing as what we get, right, when you're sitting down in the city. And I think in Arizona especially, and a lot of other rural states throughout the Midwest and stuff, the distances have been, brought together because of technology. But I also, being a digital researcher, I'm also leery of living an online life too, and so I wonder if you had some thoughts on how do you bring people together when you're far apart, because it can't just be online to do some of the work that we do. I'm very impressed with and Molly as well, of course. I've known Molly's work. So I know she's staying busy, but really impressed with the outreach and the stuff you're doing. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was one of the really great things about Sync, was that they still had that face-to-face class time. It was still on Zoom, but they could engage in real time. It wasn't just an online class where they're getting feedback that they're reading, but they have that time with both the instructor and their peers. Fellows, we have a PLC day once a month in person, and they have to come. It is a requirement because it is an 8 to 3 session. And so those hours are counting again towards that student teaching experience. So they have to come. And I have students that live in the Gila Valley. So think Stafford, Duncan, Thatcher. So they're driving a really long ways, but they're coming once a month, and they love that PLC day, regardless of their drive time, because they get to see their people and see them and hug them and have those interactive days together where they're learning together and they're going to lunch together during their lunchtime. And they build these really, really amazing relationships that are extending after they graduate. And regardless of where they are living. So Fellows is available to anybody. They don't have to be rural students. We just have a lot of rural students that are jumping in. And they're, the students that are driving from Stafford have to drive through Globe, and they're picking up the Globe students on their way to the PLC days, and they're carpooling. It's been, that is one of probably my favorite things about Fellows, is that opportunity. Another benefit with Fellows and a priority for us is in-person observation from faculty. So we go and visit them at their classrooms. It requires driving. It was the same with PEAIC. I got the opportunity to drive up to the White River Reservation, which is absolutely beautiful and stunning. If you've never been there, it's outside of Show Low Pine Top. But having the opportunity to visit those sites and see them in person is another really great benefit.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I think we might have time for one more question or comment, and then we have some announcements. They're in the chat too, but I want to just kind of say them verbally so that.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment. So, Erika, I grew up in Globe, so shout out to Globe, Arizona. My sister still lives there. And Molly, thank you so much for your leadership. Our small but mighty Ethiopian team has just been such a fruitful opportunity for me. So thank you. And thanks, Frank. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Francesca. And as I said to Jeannie too, I mean, again, there's not a lot of money or a lot of whatever with this work in Ethiopia, but we are certainly always interested in having other colleagues from ASU join us. So
Okay.
I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we are just about at an hour. So before we break, I wanted to just, so Sarup put the information in the link, but the Teachers College is sponsoring a movie showing next week at the Mesa Public Schools with the Chamber of Commerce. It's called Multiple Choice. And there'll be a panel discussion afterwards. This is at Westwood High School. So if you would, there's a trailer in the chat that you can take a look at, and please register, and we hope to see you there. And then Audrey is spearheading we're doing a crash course on the design aspirations. And so we have a survey, and you still have some time. So if you would like to weigh in on how the design aspirations shape your work, we would love to get your perspectives. Audrey, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I put the link in the chat for this room too. So yeah, and it should take you honestly 3 to 5 minutes max. You only have to, if you participate, you really only have to participate in one of the 3 design aspirations that we're covering for next week. And those are design aspirations number 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, great. All right, so we're at 12:58, so we're just about at an hour. So thank you everyone for coming. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed the opportunity to hear about our 3 faculty award winners' work. And yes, and so stay tuned. We'll have another session in the spring with our other 4 award winners. So we hope to see you there.